Is Microsoft Unified Support busting your IT budget? Well, you're not alone. US Cloud is the global leader in third-party Microsoft enterprise support, and they're helping enterprises slash cost by 30 to 50% versus Microsoft Unified, all while getting faster response times from domestic engineers. No offshoring, no long waits, just expert support you can count on 24/7, 365. Trusted by 50 of the Fortune 500 companies and offering senior-level engineers with an average of 14 years experience with Microsoft technologies, US Cloud is a smarter alternative for premium Microsoft support without the premium price. Ready to make the switch? Book a call at uscloud.com to get started today. That's uscloud.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective as we continue to move through May. And usually I give you a little behind the scenes, a little inside, how we do the show. Usually I will record the show on a Saturday or a Friday, just get it out, kind of put it together, get it out the day before, publishing it before Sunday morning, which is, typical, even though we call it a weekend perspective, we have a little bit of flexibility there. But this week, I had some flexibility. I asked myself, why would I not record it earlier? If I had the time, why would I not record it earlier? And the reality is, it is what it is. I'm going to record it on Friday, and I'm going to get it out this weekend as we normally do. So I use that terrible setup to sort of highlight what we're going to talk about today. And that is a couple of interesting proclamations, I guess, if you will, from high-end tech CEOs. So both Andy Jassy, who the CEO of Amazon, who whoever is seated in the seat of CEO of Amazon, annually writes a letter to their shareholders called the Amazon Shareholder Letter. And in that, Andy Jassy, new CEO for the last couple of years, kind of, he talked about the business, talked about a whole lot of different things. Obviously, talked about AI. But one of the things that he highlighted was this idea of, and I think this is Andy trying to portray Amazon as an innovative culture, right? Which, I think for a lot of people wouldn't really argue, although for those kind of, analysts that cover Amazon very quickly, very, very in depth, they may look at it and they say, hey, it's Amazon's been doing a lot of things for a long time. Maybe they're not as innovative as they once were. Right. And so Andy introduced this concept. He went through all the things that they're working on and highlighted that Amazon is a why culture. It's a culture that asks a lot of questions why. And, this is really kind of a continuation of what Jeff Bezos used to do. We look to do new things. We ask big questions, all that sort of stuff. But Andy introduced this sort of concept, again, lots of people are encouraged to ask the question why here at Amazon. And then he sort of threw out this thing, which I don't know if he really invented or somebody on his staff invented. He kind of measured, he says, we have a high WhyQ, WHYQ, high, what would be the right word? High level of asking questions, I guess, is kind of what he's getting at, right? So what you have is on one end of a spectrum, you have, a CEO of a company who is trying to convey the idea, whether it's internally or externally to the world, that their culture of asking lots of questions, of challenging things, of not trying to do the status quo, of asking why is a strength. It's a part of their culture. It's what they do. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we had another, CEO statement that came out, sort of not so much a statement as what we're seeing over and over again these days is a leak from a company meeting, an all hands meeting, and that was from the CEO of Uber, and he basically was, again, trying to rally the troops, trying to get people excited about what was in front of them, talking about how they need to go from just being a good company to a great company. And part of that was, they made some changes. They made some changes to their benefits program, some of the perks that they get. And in this case, it was they had moved their 1 month sabbatical. I guess if you've been at Uber for 5 years, since it's such a high stress environment, you can become eligible for a 1 month sabbatical. So think of it as, for every 5 years, you get an extra 1 month of PTO, if you will. And apparently they moved that out to 7 years. And, obviously this upset some people. They felt that they were having something taken away from them. He also did the thing that many CEOs are attempting to do, which is trying to get people to come back into the office. I think they said they want to see people back as much as possible. It helps foster the culture. And, again, none of that is really new or unique. But, it did grab a headline for, him saying, people asking, why are you doing this? Is this the right call? And, his stance was, it is what it is. And I think it's an interesting sort of comparison, the other ends, different ends of the spectrum of, WhyQ versus it is what it is. But I think the reality is that this spectrum, this set of questions is going to become for anybody working in tech, especially for anybody working in the tech industry, it's going to become kind of the spectrum that literally all of 2025 is going to be defined by, maybe 2026 as well. And the reason I say that is I think we're at an interesting, it's not a crossroads, it's just an interesting kind of juxtaposition of two things, right? And again, I always put this in a context, we went for 10 plus years, basically from, 2011-ish, 2012-ish to about 2020 of, from a tech industry perspective, just kind of good times, right? Things were good. Interest rates were low. People were hiring. People were doing well. There was a lot of new technology. There was that cloud thing just kind of came along and sort of exploded. 2020 comes along. We have that pandemic thing that came along, as some of you may have heard of, and the result of that became higher interest rates, higher inflation around the world. Companies started realizing maybe they had overhired quite a bit leading into the pandemic. Not really on purpose, but they had grown too big. Companies were looking for some accountability, some ways to sort of, cut areas in which they could be, more productive or more profitable, whatever it might have been. And, so we kind of went into that. So we had sort of a whipsaw there in about a year from what seemed like really great times to, times that were kind of, difficult. Obviously, everybody went and worked from home. And now we have this, kind of people got used to that for, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, depending on how long companies allowed that to happen. And now we're kind of seeing a little bit of a whipsaw back to, what is being characterized, depending on whether you're on the management side or kind of the worker side, as, workers having a little less control, management trying to take a little more control. I think the other thing that's kind of, again, juxtaposition against this is, especially if you're in the tech industry, but not, also in other industries, we're seeing more and more CEOs making very strong, definitive statements, sort of not just evolutionary, but in some cases revolutionary statements about what AI potentially does to their business. And, in many cases, that this is sort of first starting off as a trend that's being focused on, kind of the worker class, on knowledge workers in particular. How can you become more productive? How can you be, whether you're a software developer or you do anything else that's the sort of day-to-day desk job, how can you be more productive? And requests for example, new headcount, are those really needed? Could you be doing these, leveraging some of these newer AI tools? And so what a lot of that is doing ultimately, as you roll it up to, C-level people, is they're looking at that from the perspective of, we have maybe potentially greater competition depending on how aggressively the competitors in their marketplace adopt some of the AI, potentially shifting dynamics within a market if some company is able to adopt some of this new AI technology to offer differentiated services for their business. And ultimately what that rolls up to is sort of higher expectations, whether it's from the markets, whether it's from boards, or whether it's just, from sort of the company themselves, as to, could we be more profitable, more innovative, more accountable, all those sorts of things, right? So it's interesting to sort of watch these two things, this sort of WhyQ approach, which is, how can we continue to ask questions? How can we continue to be innovative? And the it is what it is approach, which is, what, these are the numbers that we have. I need you all to, act like adults, understand the business, understand the ramifications of, maybe too big of a perk, or too generous a thing, whatever that thing might be. And again, maybe generous is the wrong word and big is the wrong word because you think, well, I deserve that. The company does really well. But I think we're going to see a lot in 2025 and again, continuing to 26 of the sort of tension between these two things. And again, like I think we're going to see both of them. I don't think this is a one thing versus the other. And I don't want to paint, Amazon is sort of unique because Andy Jassy wrote WhyQ. Andy Jassy, several months ago was also the same one saying we're going to cut people and you need to be back in the office and those sort of things. So I think we're going to see every company, and again, the tech companies in particular. So I want to kind of get beyond just the headlines of this, right? It's an interesting thing because again, I think in the tech industry, we tend to get fascinated by the headlines of other tech companies, what they're doing. But I think we're going to see this across a bunch of different industries. But here's why I think it's sort of an interesting thing, not just from the, should people get great perks and benefits? Should they be able to work from home? If companies are making billions of dollars in profits, should there be less concern about how much that is shared with the market versus shared with workers? Those are all big, interesting questions, but that's not really kind of what I want to talk about today. I think why this is sort of an interesting spectrum and why it's worth kind of paying attention to is a couple things. First, anytime that you're communicating things, because in essence, this is these are policy questions, but they're also really fundamentally they're communication questions. And first and foremost, the larger your company gets, and the broader your company is, whether it's geographically or just volume of people and so forth, communication just becomes harder, right? It just becomes more difficult because not everybody is going to necessarily attend whatever it is. Not everybody's going to read that email that sends out the new policy. Not everybody, is going to take as much time to dig into it as the group that spent weeks and months, laboring over, every word in the announcement that was put out there. For most people, they're getting so much news, so much information all the time. This just looks like yet another thing that they've got to kind of scroll through, and hopefully, somebody on TikTok will give an explainer to them or YouTube to them. So just communication in general in this day and age is more difficult, although that is sort of crazy given the number of communication tools that we have and people's ability to sort of deal with it. But that fundamentally is difficult. Second thing that's fundamentally difficult is communicating change, right? Communicating information, saying, hey, here's the stats of something, here's the result of something is fine. Communicating changes is very, very difficult. And this, in essence, whether you're on the WhyQ end of the spectrum or the it is what it is end of the spectrum, you're essentially communicating change. And the hardest part about that is you can't communicate change in the same way that you just communicate numbers or status, because change is one of those things in which people have to sort of hear it first and foremost. They probably have to hear it a couple of times because they have a whole bunch of questions like, wait, does this mean this? Does this mean this? Everybody puts change into the context of themselves, right? So as much as the company wants you to think about this, hey, this is for the good of the company. I want you to understand why this is important for the company. People put change communication into, they personalize it, right? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my job? What does this mean for my team? What does this mean for the skills that I have to have, now and going into the future? What does this mean in terms of the number of extra reports that I'm going to have to write or emails that I'm going to have to send? What does this mean in terms of how many extra meetings am I going to have with other teams in order to be able to do the thing that you want us to do? What does this mean in terms of, I have no idea what that means. What do we do when there's a bunch of ambiguity from the leadership team in terms of like, hey, they want us to go that direction, but maybe not precisely that direction, it's just generally that direction. And we're not really sure if they want us to go up 30%, up 100%, up with a curve, whatever that might be. You're asking yourself all those sort of questions as you're trying to process this stuff. And that question asking process takes quite a while, right? And I think what happens is, leadership sort of goes, hey, we worked on this for however long we did. We think we've got this all sort of buttoned up. We're ready to talk about it. And, I don't think there's always the realization that, the ramifications of it, the ripples in the pond take quite a while to sort of work themselves out. Because what ends up happening, obviously, with change is everybody sort of hears what's said. They determine whether they think it's good for them or not. And then people do what they do, which is they try and game the system. They try and look for loopholes. They try and look for ways to, sort of comply without having to actually change, right? So all those things sort of happen. And so the process of communicating change is one that isn't a one-time thing. It isn't, I mean, it can be a one-time thing. Hey, we are going to, cut this benefit. It just no longer exists. But the ramifications of it, the downstream of it and so forth, takes a while to sort of shake out, right? So I think that's the first thing to kind of keep in mind, is that whether you are a leader having to manage in this spectrum of WhyQ to it is what it is, right? Like, so your leadership has told you you are a downstream manager, you've got one team, or maybe you've got two or three teams. You're going to have to sort of live between this spectrum. And then I think if you are, kind of a worker, you are going to have to sort of live between the spectrum between, we want more innovation out of you, but we don't really want you to ask questions, but you're going to want to ask questions. And again, that's not totally unusual for the day to day, but I think we are going to see quite a bit of ramp up just in terms of the velocity at which we're going to see people asked to think about innovation, drive innovation, look for ways to improve efficiency, drive change. And there's also going to be sort of an increased level of, hey, the longer that we sort of talk about this, the longer we debate this, the more we're not getting stuff done. So, as a leadership team, we are going to make a call. We're going to decide what we're going to do, and it is what it is, right? So I think both individual workers are going to have to sort of start to get used to the pace of the swing between those things in the spectrum accelerating. And I think especially for middle managers in particular, this is a difficult thing, because it's not unusual to ask your team to go faster. It's not unusual to ask your team to come up with new ideas and so forth. But I think it is difficult when, especially on the it is what it is end of the spectrum, which we all sort of know is, kind of like your parents. When you're asking when kids are asking their parents, like, why do we have to do this? Why are we? And they just go, because we're just doing it because I said so. It is sort of the parent equivalent of WhyQ, and it is what it is. And so I think, for anybody that's got kids, they sort of understand that dynamic. But for middle managers, it becomes sort of difficult, because again, you're going to spend 360 days of the year, 364 days of the year, trying to get the best out of your team, but also trying to motivate your team, telling them they're doing well, and especially if they are doing well. Hey, you're doing great. Hey, you as an individual, you're doing awesome. Hey, as a team, we're producing great things. We're part of something that's very big, and we're an important group. People depend upon us. And then you're going to those 2 or 3 or 4 days of the year, whether you're doing individual reviews of people, or you're doing, hey, this new company policy is coming along, and you're going to have to kind of go, it is what it is, right? You're all just average. Your stuff it was fine, but it's not good enough anymore, right? And you're going to have to kind of live with that. And if you've been, doing this for a while, you sort of know, well, I do an aspect of that today. But I think, again, that AI factor in here and its ability to sort of accelerate things is going to make this a more frequent conversation. I think, the other piece of this is, we're going to see more and more. And again, this is something that we're seeing, and we've seen this before, right? We've seen this before when big new technology trends come along. People who have, it's really hard to find people that understand, cloud native development, or people who understand Kubernetes, or people who understand whatever that new thing might be. They understand cloud, right? Oh, those people are in high demand. Those people are, they're hard to find. We're going to have to pay extra for those folks. And then what quickly happens is, over time, as the world figures out the new thing, it becomes more broadly used and so forth. The level of that uniqueness, diminishes. There becomes more people with a skill set that's in the ballpark. People figure, I don't have to pay at the A level. I can pay at a B level, or whatever that might be. And we're seeing that right now with AI, right? And it creates a lot of, sort of a small number of haves and a larger number of what people want to characterize as sort of have-nots. The reality is, it's just, there is a segment of the market that is, paying a premium, and in some cases a super premium, for a set of people, or a set of skills, or a set of tools that are, again, sort of, unique, at least for this period of time. And we see that with AI. But, so it's going to be very interesting, I think, to sort of watch how companies evolve in this space, because part of this conversation is about culture, right? And it's a thing that companies love to talk about all the time. We work very hard on our company culture. Our company culture is very unique. We care about what we're doing as a family. And you're part of the family. We think about we want to think about our people, and this is kind of the purpose of HR and all that sort of stuff. And then that stuff all sort of, I don't want to say goes away, but just gets sort of pushed to the side when there is it is what it is set of decisions that have to get made. And I think for some people that's just normal business. They're used to that. They understand the kind of the need to sort of live between that spectrum. But I think for people that haven't gone through this, and again, this is always us kind of wondering, is the audience for the Cloudcast somebody who's lived through 2 or 3 cycles of this or 4 cycles of this, or is this somebody who's fairly new to it? And I think the reality is it's probably a combination of all those things. It's kind of important to understand where are we in one of these cycles, right? So anyways, I kind of wanted to highlight that. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch over the next, again, I think maybe year and a half, as we begin to start to see AI become part of the mainstream of what people do, from being sort of a unique thing, from seeing people and teams adapt to what it means for what they do, whether it is sort of accelerated productivity or helping them do things better. There's always going to be a lot of discussions of what does my role continue to be? All those discussions which we've been having for the last couple of years. But it is interesting to watch when some of these headlines sort of bubble up. And I'm sure these conversations at the C-level or in staff meetings or even in company all hands and town hall meetings are happening all over the place. They're just not necessarily getting leaked like an Uber or a shareholder letter like Amazon. But I think it's important to sort of think about the dichotomy of these two things. I think it's important to think about how would you react to either one of those, right? Is having a culture of asking questions encouraged in your company? Maybe not. In some companies it is, and in some companies it isn't. Is that something you want to celebrate? But at the same time, what do you think is either coming down the road? What do you think happens if some things change, especially as they impact people's like benefits and compensation and ability to sort of get away from work? How do you expect yourself to sort of respond to those things or frame them and communicate them? So I think it's worth thinking about, because I think we are going to, like I said, I think the sort of intersection we have now of a very big push to sort of move away from what happened with COVID, whether that's work from home or just, behave differently or not have overspent or not have, too many people doing certain things that maybe you didn't necessarily need that many people. And then the accelerant of AI is going to, kind of the combination of those two things pushing against each other is going to play a fairly interesting, an interesting role between there. So anyways, you can decide where your company is on the spectrum between Oracle and Uber and Amazon. You're probably somewhere in the middle. You've probably got a little of both in there. But anyways, just something to think about, and again, something to start to internalize as to, what your role is, what you're going to have to communicate, what you might expect to hear downstream, and maybe ask some questions going on within your company. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for continuing to tell a friend. We've been having a good time this year. Lots of interesting conversations. Aaron's been doing a great job on the Wednesday shows. He just sort of got out there, ran with it. He's been having a great time running those shows, and we appreciate that. And so with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.